because we are religious Jews and we are following the religion of Judaism, which teaches compassion and peace. Therefore, we are out here to condemn these atrocities and violence. It's because we are Jews. It's because we follow the Ten Commandments. It's because we are forbidden to kill and to steal. That's why we stand up here and in many other cities to condemn this violence and atrocities.
الوقت حان منذ وقت وليس الآن، فيجب على الإخوة في فلسطين أن يتحدوا وأن يتكاتفوا وأن يضع كل أخ يده في يد أخيه، وننسى الخلافات والاتجاهات الفكرية والتنظيمية، فهدفنا الأول هو الاتحاد هو الاتحاد هو الاتحاد في قبل هذا العدو الغاشم.
La réalité, c'est un peuple digne, fier de nous présenter ses villes, ses collines, son histoire. C'est un peuple debout qui ne renoncera pas. Le 29 novembre prochain, à l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies.
Took place in other Italian cities such as Venice, Palermo, Ravenna and Trento. The organizers urged the international community to put an end to the massacre of Palestinian people in Gaza and to stop what they call the Israeli war machine.
It's
the umpteenth attack on Palestine. Enough with war criminals such as Netanyahu and Lieberman. The Israeli military campaign against Palestine also comes right before Israeli elections. Strange coincidence, isn't it?
The Union of the Palestinian Communities of Italy are calling on the Italian government to support Palestinian statehood before the United Nations. Italy is one of Israel's most strategic partners in the fields of weaponry and in the science and technology.
Anger on the streets of Cairo lasted well into the night. Protesters fought with police all around Tahrir Square, a symbol of last year's revolution. In the square itself, people stayed on to protest against Mohammed Morsi's decree, giving him powers never held before by an Egyptian president.
I'm totally against the declaration that came out yesterday, and I felt that nothing happened since Morsi became president of Egypt.
Outside the capital, anti-government protesters fought street battles with police. This was the scene in Alexandria, Egypt's second city on the Mediterranean coast. The target of many protesters across the country were Muslim Brotherhood offices, the party President Morsi belonged to until he ran for office. Those opposing him say the president is still putting forward.
Hundreds of Venezuelans gathered in full force at Caracas's main square, calling for an end to Israel's atrocities in Gaza. During the rally, activists and politicians spoke about Venezuela's longtime support for the Palestinian people and its strong stance against Israeli occupation. Last week, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez called Israel's military assault on Gaza as savage. In 2009, the Chavez government broke diplomatic relations with Israel and later recognized Palestine as an independent state, being the first country in the Americas to do so.
Anti-Israeli sentiments rang high in Sana'a Friday, as thousands of Yemenis took to the streets in different parts of the capital. praising the Palestinian resistance and condemning the Israeli regime for the recent massacre committed on Gaza. Protesters in the middle of Sana'a held up Palestinian flags and burned the Israeli flag in condemnation over the air raids which killed many Palestinian children. In the 60 Square, the Friday Imam hailed the Palestinian resistance and the regional revolutions which he said came out peacefully to topple corrupted regimes in the region. The Imam stressed that ending government corruption is a key principle of Islam, which Imam Hussein, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, sacrificed his life for.
I say to everyone in the north and south of Yemen that Imam Hussein, the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib, was indeed martyred, calling for an end to government corruption and for the sake of restoring righteousness and unity in Islam.
They're here because they're outraged, but it's hard to tell who they're more furious with, Israel or the British government.
The protests here are reminiscent of demonstrations that took place outside the Israeli embassy 4 years ago during Israel's last major attack on Gaza. The difference this time is that the British government's support for Israel is even more pronounced.
And protesters say that support is in contrast to general public opinion.
The British government knows very well what public opinion is in this country. Public opinion supports Palestinian rights, it supports justice, it supports peace. It does not support what William Hague is saying.
William Hague, the British Foreign Minister, has laid the blame for the current Israeli bombing of Gaza and the resulting deaths of civilians squarely on the shoulders of Hamas.
Hamas bears principal responsibility for this current crisis. I utterly condemn rocket attacks from Gaza into southern Israel by Hamas and other armed groups. This creates an intolerable situation for Israeli civilians in southern Israel who have the right to live without fear of attack from Gaza.
He failed to condemn Israel's attacks, which have killed children and civilians, as well as members of Hamas. And protesters say both the British government and the British mainstream media have misrepresented the timeline of events to portray what's happening as Israeli retaliation and as a fair fight.
The fourth largest military power in the world, armed and supported by the biggest military powers in the world, armed with F-16s, armed with Predator drones, armed with missiles, armed with tanks. There is no equivalence between the Israeli state and the Palestinian resistance.
The West are showing no respect for the Palestinian people by the presentation of their cause on their media, by the treatment of the Palestinian people, and standing idly by while bombs rain down on those poor people in Gaza City and other places.
This is a battle between David and Goliath, and we are on the side of David and you, the oppressors, the exploiters, the armourers, the Tory government. You are on the side of the oppressors.
I asked the protesters whether they felt a sense of futility returning to the same spot to protest another Israeli attack while their government ignored their views.
The position is waning, it has no back, it doesn't hold water. The whole world now, and it shows on the social media, on Twitter sphere and the such, it's showing that more and more people are seeing through the lies, through the smoke screen, through the propaganda. And therefore, the governments of the West, mighty as they may be, but actually in terms of popular support, they are on their own in this. We're seeing Israel being more and more isolated. It may still have powerful friends in powerful places and in high offices, but on the streets around the world, even in the media, it's hemorrhaging support. And bit by bit, we are seeing some new faces join the struggle in order to see Palestine free and dignified.
There have been several protests outside the Israeli embassy over the past few days, and on occasion there's been a smaller pro-Israeli counter-protest. Tensions have risen, and the two groups have been separated by the police. But Jews are split across both sides here, and the protests in solidarity with Gaza have boasted the presence of several diverse Jewish groups, much to the annoyance of some pro-Israelis, one of whom tried to stop Jews joining the Palestine protest and then took a swing at our camera after he failed. And despite his efforts, Jews opposing Israel's policies are making sure their voices are heard.
End the occupation, end the house demolitions, 27,000 demolitions since 1967, that's over 10 a week, every week for 45 years. End the settlements, establish civil rights and human rights and justice for Palestinians.
Israel often claims that it has the support of Jews the world over for what it's doing, but it doesn't. It abuses sympathy of Jews the world over for Israel when it came into being, and it abuses that to say that all Jews are behind what it's doing, and many are not. We're in touch with a number of Jewish groups around the world who are also protesting in different ways. And one of our ways of protesting is to be here today in solidarity with Palestinians, alongside Palestinians.
Similar actions have been held up and down the country. This one took place in Scotland, starting in the shadow of Edinburgh Castle and ending at the Scottish Parliament. Others took to the streets with or without cameras watching in dozens of other towns and cities. Back in London, the protests are set to continue as long as Israel's bombs keep falling. Hassan Ghani for The Real News, London.
Let's understand what the precipitating event here was that's causing the current crisis. And that was an ever-escalating number of missiles that were landing not just in Israeli territory, but in areas that are populated. And there's no country on earth that would tolerate missiles raining down on its citizens from outside its borders. So we are fully supportive of Israel's right to defend itself from missiles landing on people's homes and workplaces and potentially killing civilians. And we will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself. Now, what is also true is that we are actively working with all the parties in the region to see if we can end those missiles being fired without further escalation of violence in the region. And so I've had several conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I've had several conversations with President Morsi of Egypt. I've spoken to Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey, who was visiting Egypt right in the midst of what was happening in Gaza. And my message to all of them was that Israel has every right to expect that it does not have missiles fired into its territory. If that can be accomplished without a ramping up of military activity in Gaza, that's preferable.